Europe's economic map is being redrawn. For 70 years, the heart of Europe's economy beat in Berlin. Now that heart is being surgically removed and transplanted 300 miles to the east. In 2023, while German industrial production fell by up to 2%, Poland absorbed a flood of German manufacturing, pushing its economy toward the $1 trillion mark. Defying Brussels and rejecting Western European rules, Poland is pulling off one of the most dramatic industrial shifts in modern history. This isn't a catch-up story, it's a takeover. In September 2025, Poland hit a milestone once reserved for the world's economic giants. Its GDP had surpassed $1 trillion, putting it in the same league as the United States, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, China, and Japan. At first glance, Poland doesn't seem to fit in that list. It looks like an outlier, an anomaly. This is, after all, the same nation that sat behind the Iron Curtain just a few decades ago. A country that certainly wasn't known as an economic powerhouse when it entered the European Union in 2004. It was more associated with cheap labor rather than any sort of domestic industrial might. Yet, here it is, with a $1 trillion economy and ever-increasing influence not just in Europe but on the global stage. And at the very same time Poland is rising, its neighbor Germany is suffering a dramatic decline. The contrast between the two countries is striking. For decades, Germany was Europe's undisputed industrial powerhouse. It dominated manufacturing and built a global reputation for producing everything from luxury automobiles to advanced industrial machinery. Germany wasn't just Europe's largest economy, it was the motor that kept the entire European project running. But in 2023, that motor started to sputter. Industrial production rates fell by approximately 1.5% to 2%. Then came the so-called Mittelstand exodus. One of the reasons why Germany has been so successful over the years is its vast network of successful small to mid-sized businesses, collectively known as the Mittelstand. They may not get the attention of bigger brands and Fortune 500 firms, but these companies are often world leaders in their specific niche markets. But together they make up a massive part of Germany's economic strength. Between 2023 and 2024, however, a staggering 32% of the country's Mittelstand manufacturers reported plans to move production out of Germany. The Rhine-Ruhr Valley, the forge of Germany's economic foundations, is being hollowed out, one company at a time. And they're not moving to China or the US. They're not going far at all, in fact. Just over the eastern border, into Poland. German appliance giant Miele has moved its washing machine production out of Germany to a facility in Swawerów, Poland. Heating company Weissmann poured 200 million euros into a new heat pump production plant in Legnica, while winding down its operations in long-standing German hubs. These aren't one-off occurrences, they are part of a much bigger trend. The wealth that funded the post-war European project is drifting eastward, and it didn't happen overnight. This is the culmination of a 30-year master plan that started from absolute zero. The dawn of the 1990s brought about the end of one massive chapter in Polish history and the start of something completely new. Back then, the country had almost nothing. Its very survival hung in the balance. The collapse of communism delivered widespread chaos. Factories closed, jobs were lost, and entire industries vanished overnight. Poland's new leadership was left to pick up the pieces and make sense of the mess. A lot of countries would have struggled to get through it, but Poland had a plan. One that had the potential to either ruin the country completely or put it on the path to a far better and brighter future. The Balcerowicz Plan. Known as shock therapy, it was a high-stakes survival plan built around rapid, sweeping economic reforms. In the span of a single day, price controls were lifted, subsidies to state industries were cut, the currency was devalued, and Poland opened itself up to international trade. It was an economic shockwave that tore down the old system and forced a new one into place. Its impact was immediate and severe. Unemployment, which hadn't really even existed as a concept under communism, skyrocketed. Millions of people found themselves without jobs and living standards plummeted. The state safety net was falling apart. National income plunged by 22%. Industrial production dropped by 25%. Inflation soared. But beyond the pain and the struggle, an economic revolution was taking place. Since the state had stopped bailing out businesses that weren't working, old monopolies died out. In their place emerged a new private sector with the potential to rival any in Europe. Lean, hungry, and with everything to prove, new businesses rose out of the ashes. Since they were operating in strict constraints, Polish entrepreneurs designed their companies to be resilient, cost-effective, and flexible. It set them up for success not just in the short term, but for generations to come. Once the dust had started to settle, Poland had laid the foundations for decades of economic expansion. And time would prove that the Balcerowicz plan was the right one after all. In 1990, Poland's nominal GDP stood at $65 billion. Now it's over $1 trillion. It's grown more than 15 times larger under 4 decades. Most other European nations can't match that. And shock therapy didn't just stabilize the currency and revive the economy, it created a new generation of workers and entrepreneurs with a desire to succeed. For the first time in decades, hard work, innovation, and risk-taking were rewarded. All they needed was the infrastructure, and they found someone else to pay for it. Poland had put the pieces in place for long-term success, but it still needed to link them together, and it needed roads, rail, logistic networks, and other infrastructure. All of that costs money. Poland didn't want to foot the bill all by itself, so it got more than a little help from its wealthy Western neighbors. In 2004, it entered the EU. At the time, this was widely seen as a generous gesture from the West. Wealthier nations like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom were extending a helping hand to the struggling countries of Eastern Europe. Warsaw, however, saw the situation through a different lens. It was a momentous occasion, a sign of Europe growing stronger and neighboring nations wanting to help and support one another. But it was also a golden opportunity. An opportunity to execute the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the European continent. Over 2 decades, Poland absorbed an astonishing 161.6 billion euros from the EU budget. That's enough to build more than 100 copies of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa. The scale was staggering. Tens of billions of dollars were flooding into Poland every year, but getting the money was just part one of the plan. Poland had to spend it correctly. Other EU member states had mismanaged their EU funds and continued to do so. Poland had no intention of making the same mistakes. It weaponized the war chest that it had been given, directing massive portions into all-important agricultural and infrastructure developments. In the following years, Poland constructed a web of highways, roads, and high-speed rail corridors that completely rewrote the logistical maps of Central Europe. In 2004, the country had just 450 miles of highways and expressways. By 2024, it had over 3,100 miles. The roads and rail lines weren't laid out randomly. Every inch was carefully calculated and optimized for efficiency. Bit by bit, Poland built an enormous geopolitical trap that the Western world never saw coming. As the country's infrastructure improved, multinational corporations faced a new choice. They could stay in Western Europe and deal with rising costs and strained transport networks, or they could nearshore their operations to Poland and take advantage of the lower costs, EU-funded infrastructure, and a rapidly expanding workforce. The EU's Western leaders didn't even see the impending crisis unfolding in front of them. They thought that by funding Poland's development, they were creating a reliable and even submissive economic partner. They expected nothing but political obedience in exchange for those tens of billions of euros. Warsaw, meanwhile, was using the West's cash to rip away its industrial dominance. And once the infrastructure was in place, Warsaw was ready to reinforce it with something that would cement its status, not as a bit player on the European stage, but a headline act. In February 2022, another seismic shift struck the European continent. Poland was once again ready to make the most of the change. Russian tanks and troops crossed the border into Ukraine, signaling the start of a years-long war. The effects would ripple far beyond the battlefield, impacting politics and economies around the globe. For decades, countries like Germany treated defense as a low priority. Military budgets were scaled back while budgets were plowed into social welfare projects. Warsaw, however, went the opposite way. It funneled large amounts of its national budget into defense. By 2024, its military spending had surged to a historic 4.12% of its GDP. That's the highest percentage in the entire NATO alliance. Proportionally speaking, it is double that of Germany and France. It's even higher than the biggest military superpower of them all, the United States, which was around 3.4% of GDP at the time. Once again, Poland wasn't just throwing that money around or spending at random. It was investing in some of the finest military hardware on the planet. South Korean K-2 Black Panther main battle tanks, hundreds of K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzers, and dozens of Fa-50 fighter jets. By the time Poland's purchases are finished in 2030, the country will have more main battle tanks than the UK, Germany, France, and Italy combined. It's pulling off the most aggressive military buildup since the Cold War. But that's not all. Poland isn't just buying tanks and shipping them in, it has signed offset deals with South Korea to secure the technology and the know-how to build the tanks on its own soil. Today, hundreds of tanks and howitzers are rolling off production lines inside of Poland. And with the war in Ukraine, the country has also become a vital logistics hub for US and NATO forces. Since 2022, countless tons of weapons, ammunition, and supplies have flowed through Poland, and the country has benefited from a massive geopolitical shield. By making itself a reliable transit corridor while building one of the continent's strongest armies, Poland gained importance. The US, the UK, France, Germany, and other Western powers can't afford for this country to fail, so they'll do whatever it takes to defend and protect it. And with America's military backing secured, Poland gained the ultimate leverage to force the EU's hand. For years, there was a narrative among Western media regarding Poland's place on the European stage. It was seen as a pariah state, a problem child. Some of Warsaw's more outspoken leaders were regularly condemned in the European Parliament. Brussels often invoked various articles and EU rights to punish and penalize Poland. The country was repeatedly fined and threatened. For a time, it looked like Warsaw would have to eventually bend the knee and toe the line. But the war changed everything. The country was vital for Europe's survival, so it became harder for Brussels to threaten or intimidate. While Western leaders continued to argue over abstract articles and the rule of law, Warsaw was focused on what mattered, using its newfound status as the Ukraine logistics hub to its advantage. The turning point came in early 2024. For months, the European Commission had kept 137 billion euros worth of funds that were intended for Poland on ice. It was a game-changing amount of cash, completely frozen and used as a financial chokehold to pile pressure onto the country's leaders. But Warsaw didn't blink. It continued to do what it had always done, strengthening its infrastructure, beefing up its borders, improving its defenses, and making itself more valuable for the continental cause. It shifted political course, committing to restore judicial independence and resetting relations with the European Union. Poland's mission paid off. The EU eventually gave in, unblocking the entire 137 billion euro package, including approximately 60 billion euros in Recovery and Resilience Facility or RRF funds. It was a complete capitulation by the EU establishment and a remarkable victory for Poland. It had overturned the odds, gaming the system to enjoy an enormous injection of Western capital, all while maintaining a solid and stable stance of sovereign defiance. By this point, Poland had attained the very summit of its strategic leverage. It was strong economically and militarily, and it had beaten the West at its own game. But while the Warsaw leaders celebrated, they didn't realize they were losing a battle that couldn't be fought with tanks or subsidies. Another long-standing narrative has also persisted around Poland as the years have gone by. It claims that the country is some sort of conservative cultural fortress, a nation that has effectively sealed its borders against the demographic shifts that are occurring elsewhere across the European continent. Warsaw's leaders have pushed this myth, repeatedly stating that they will never adopt the immigration-oriented models of places like Germany and the United Kingdom. But the data says something completely different. In 2022, it issued over 700,000 first residence permits to non-EU citizens. For 6 years running, Warsaw has issued more work permits to non-EU nationals than any other EU member, including Germany and France. Poland claims to be some sort of bastion of anti-immigration policy, yet imports more foreign labor than the countries its leaders like to criticize. Hundreds of thousands of workers have been brought in from all over the globe, including countries like India, Uzbekistan, and the Philippines. Why? Because it was the only way that Poland would survive. The country's growth came at a cost. Eventually, it found itself with businesses that were on the verge of booming, but a massive lack of labor to power them. The country's unemployment rate had dropped to one of the lowest levels in Europe, but there were still too many jobs and not enough people to fill them. To prevent a catastrophic economic collapse, the state flipped its immigration stance on its head. It funneled hundreds of thousands of foreign workers into logistics hubs, manufacturing plants, and critical industries. It was never a permanent solution. In fact, importing labor is merely a stopgap measure for a much darker, permanent crisis looming over this trillion-dollar economy. What Poland really wanted was to have more homegrown workers to fill roles and power its continued economic expansion. There was just one problem: the country was heading straight for a dramatic demographic cliff. In 2016, Warsaw launched the Family 500 Plus program. It offered a monthly tax-free cash benefit of 500 zloty to families, around $130, for every child they had. It was an aggressive measure to encourage Polish people to have more kids. It was leveled up in 2024, becoming the 800 Plus program with a new and improved monthly payment of 800 zloty, almost $220. The Polish government went all in. They hoped this would be enough to reverse its nation's demographic decline. It wasn't. The pro-family program certainly helped countless Polish people, easing child poverty and making it easier for households to put food on the table. But it didn't improve the number of babies being born. By 2023, Poland's fertility rate had fallen to 1.16 children per woman. The trend continued in 2024, with the rate dropping even lower to 1.11. It was the lowest in all of Europe and the lowest in Poland since the end of the Second World War. It's nowhere near the recognized replacement level rate of 2.1 deemed necessary for any population to remain stable without having to rely on immigration. Warsaw learned that money alone can't solve its demographic decline. The causes run deeper. They are structural, shaped by social change in Poland, and those same changes are tied to its economic boom. Because as Poland surged swiftly towards its trillion-dollar economy, a housing crisis emerged in the country's big urban centers. In countries like Warsaw and Krakow, average property prices haven't just risen, they have soared. For a young Polish couple just starting off, even a simple one-bedroom apartment feels out of reach. This has forced millions of people into rental insecurity or massive mortgages. When people don't know where they'll be living next year, or if they can even make their next mortgage payment, starting a family is rarely the top priority. At the very same time, Poland is also sprinting headfirst into a deadly environmental trap. The country's industrial surge was fueled by fossil fuels. Poland still relies heavily on coal for around 50% of its electrical energy. That means it has the most carbon-intensive power grid in all of Europe. Poland's reliance on fossil fuels means a ticking clock is looming over the country. The EU is pushing ahead with strict climate targets that will force member states to cut emissions quickly. That means Poland will have to shut down large parts of its coal infrastructure, setting off a chain reaction through its economy. Higher energy prices, a weaker cost advantage, and a country that may no longer look as attractive to global manufacturers. Its exports will suffer and its revenue streams will be squeezed. If it dares to defy the EU's rules, it could face devastating border tariffs that would undermine its position inside the single market. In short, Warsaw is speeding straight into a brick wall, and it may not have enough time to slow down before the collision comes. Even with the challenges ahead, Poland has succeeded in changing the face of Europe. The continental map has been redrawn. The historical architecture that saw the Western powers exert control for generations has been smashed. While the old guard of Paris and Berlin was busy with bureaucracy and political polarization, Poland wasn't just rewriting the rule book, it was inventing its own, and in doing so, it was dragging the continent's center of gravity to the east. Poland is no longer an emerging market. It's no longer a subservient peripheral partner. It's now the face of 21st century Europe. Warsaw exploited the EU's financial structures to build its own world-class infrastructure. It offered a more profitable and attractive alternative to the corporations of the German Mittelstand. Even when war came to its doorstep, it made all the right moves to capitalize on the situation. It's a heavily armed, highly industrialized powerhouse, and it reached that point not by conforming to the classic Western liberal playbook, but by charting its own course. And that very course could be the one that wins the 21st century if and only if Poland can survive its ongoing demographic collapse. The country stands on a precipice. It's become a European superpower. It has fortified its borders. It's gained enormous influence and respect on the world stage. It has achieved what once seemed impossible. The only question left is, can it hold on? Poland's ambitious moves couldn't come at a more important moment. As tensions rise across Europe, every major power is keeping a close eye on Russia. Watch what will actually happen if Russia invades Poland to see how a Russian advance would play out. Or click on this video.